Please, my baby."
Her voice was barely human now, just a torn whisper dragged through pain and fear. She stood in the middle of the hospital lobby, 9 months pregnant, blood sliding down her legs. One hand pressed hard against her belly, as if she could hold her child inside by force.
"I need help,"
she gasped.
"Please, don't do this. Please help my child."
The security guard tightened his grip on her arm. At the front desk, the doctor didn't even bother to look up. "If she can't pay," he said flatly, "remove her." And just like that, a woman in labor was dragged toward the door, as if she were a nuisance, not a life hanging by a thread. She stumbled down the front steps into the hard Abuja morning, dizzy, bleeding, and alone. The world kept moving around her. Cars rolled by. A bike rider checked his phone. No one stopped. No one asked if she was dying. Then a black Rolls-Royce turned into the driveway. It didn't rush. It didn't screech. It glided in like it belonged to a different universe entirely. The car stopped directly in front of her. The back door opened. A man stepped out, looked at her once, then at the hospital doors, and said a single sentence that would make everyone inside freeze before the day was over. Her name was Zainab Musa. She was 26 years old, heavily pregnant, and stranded in a city that didn't know her, didn't care about her, and had almost decided she wasn't worth saving. That morning, she had taken 3 crowded Danfo buses from the edge of Abuja, one after another, every pothole sending pain through her back like a blade. She held her stomach with both hands and whispered prayers under her breath each time the bus jolted. Her dress was faded yellow cotton, washed so many times the color had nearly given up. Her slippers were thin rubber, the kind that slapped the ground with every step. Inside her bra, folded into a tiny square, she had hidden 400 naira, money she had saved over weeks by eating less than anyone should. Someone had told her, Blessed Hope Private Hospital treated people with dignity. So she came there, holding on to that hope. She came walking slowly through the gates, even with her lower back burning and her legs shaking so badly she could barely feel her feet. She was terrified. But she was a mother first, and mothers do not stop walking when their child is in danger. The woman at reception didn't look at Zainab's face. She looked at her dress, then her slippers, then the cheap plastic bag hanging from her wrist, the kind market women used for dried fish and pepper. Her name tag said, Blessing, but there was no blessing anywhere in her eyes.
50,000 naira deposit, she said,
before we open any file. Zainab braced herself against the counter and tried to stay upright. She explained, calmly, because calm was all she had left, that she was 9 months pregnant and had been bleeding since early morning. She explained that she had no family nearby. She explained that her husband, Bello, had left 3 weeks ago to settle a business issue and never returned. She explained that she had nowhere else to go. The receptionist looked at her the way people look at stray dogs that wander too close to their food. Government hospital is across town, she said. Take a bus to Area 1. Then she lowered her eyes back to her register, ending the conversation as if she had just given directions, not denied emergency care. A young nurse passing through the lobby heard the sound Zainab made when the next contraction hit. It was not a scream. It was worse. It was the sound of someone trying not to break in public. The nurse stopped at once. Her name was Halima. She was small, quick-eyed, wearing a pale blue hijab tucked neatly beneath her cap. She crossed the floor in seconds and placed a hand on Zainab's back. "Breathe," she said softly. "Just breathe." For one tiny moment, in all that cold hospital air, that hand was the kindest thing anyone had done for Zainab in weeks. And baby, if this story is already pulling you in, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Then heavy footsteps came from the hallway, and the entire room changed. Madame Chidinma, the head nurse, arrived with the slow authority of someone used to humiliating people in public. She was in her 50s, broad-shouldered, arms folded, her face arranged in a permanent expression of controlled disgust. She looked Zainab up and down like a landlord inspecting damage to a building. "What is this one doing here?" she asked. Not to Zainab, to the room. As if Zainab were not standing there. As if pain made people invisible. Then, loud enough for everyone waiting to hear, Madame Chidinma announced that Blessed Hope was a private hospital, not a charity ward. Pregnancy, she said, was not a community fundraising project. People who came without money had no right to expect private treatment. She said all this with the smooth confidence of someone who had never once doubted her own cruelty. A man in the corner lowered his gaze. An old woman wrapped in printed cloth closed her eyes. A young couple sat frozen, fingers locked together. Nobody moved. That is how cruelty survives in public. It turns witnesses into furniture. Zainab reached for the counter, but her hand slipped. The security guard stepped forward, not to help, to remove the problem. He took her by the arm and started steering her toward the exit. At that exact moment, Dr. Amechi Obi stepped out of his office, glanced at the scene, understood it instantly, and without slowing down said, "If she can't pay, remove her." He disappeared back into his office before the guard reached the door. And so they dragged her outside. At the bottom of the hospital steps, the guard let go of her arm and walked away without a word. Zainab stood there in the heat, swaying, one hand on her stomach, the other hanging uselessly at her side. Cars moved beyond the gate. A motorcycle idled by the curb. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. She had no phone. She had sold it weeks ago when the money for food ran out. Her mother was in Kaduna. Her only friend in Abuja had moved away months before. And Bello had walked out of their room in Lugbe one evening and never returned. At first, she had cried until she couldn't anymore. Then she prayed, because prayer was cheaper than despair. Another contraction hit. She counted the spaces between the pain. "If I sit down," she thought, "I may never get up again." So she remained standing. Then she heard the engine. Not loud, not showy, just smooth, deep, expensive. The kind of sound that belongs to people who are never told no. The black Rolls-Royce turned in slowly and stopped directly in front of her, as if it had come for her specifically. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door. The man who emerged looked to be in his mid-50s, tall, solid, dressed in a dark green abaya with gold embroidery at the collar. Nothing about him was flashy, yet everything about him carried weight. He looked like a man who had spent decades making important decisions and had learned the cost of each one. He looked at Zainab, not with pity, not with shock, with attention. "You're bleeding," he said. It was not a question. "They refused to take me," she whispered. His eyes lifted to the hospital entrance. "I know." Then he turned and walked up the steps. Inside, the air shifted instantly. Receptionists sat straighter. Nurses stopped whispering. Even the walls seemed to realize something had changed. The man placed a black card on the counter and said quietly, "Admit that woman now." The receptionist grabbed the card with both hands. Dr. Obi appeared from his office as though summoned by a private alarm that rang only for the truly powerful. One look through the glass at the Rolls-Royce, one look at the man standing in his lobby, and he transformed. The same doctor who had ignored a bleeding woman minutes earlier now wore a warm smile and rushed forward with outstretched hand. "Alhaji Danjuma," he said smoothly. "Please, sir, we were just—" Danjuma turned his head and looked at him. Just looked. Dr. Obi's hand remained hanging in the air, then slowly dropped. Zainab was admitted at last. Halima was assigned to her room, which felt like the only mercy in the building. Danjuma stayed long enough to make sure the paperwork had actually begun, then stepped outside to make some calls. He had barely left when Madame Chidinma returned. With a smile that wasn't a smile, she told Halima to move the patient to room 12. Halima hesitated. Room 12 was the worst room in the building. It sat beside the generator wall, hot, noisy, forgotten. The ceiling fan barely moved. The call button hadn't worked in years. The mattress had a broken spring that seemed designed to find the exact place in a person's back where pain lived. Halima started to object, but Madame Chidinma walked away before she finished. Zainab said nothing. A broken room was still inside the hospital. And inside was all she needed right now. That night stretched forever. She pressed the call button 3 times in darkness. No one came. On Halima's 4th round, she found Zainab gripping the side rails of the bed, breathing in short, shattered bursts. The contractions were piling over each other now with no mercy in between. Halima moved quickly, sent for Dr. Obi, and began preparing everything. He arrived late, still fastening his coat, irritation written all over his face. Not because a woman was suffering, because he had been inconvenienced. He did what was medically necessary and not 1 ounce more. And in that overheated room beside the generator, with Halima's steady hands and quiet voice as the only comfort she had, Zainab brought her child into the world. A baby boy. Small. Beautiful. Then the room went silent. He didn't cry. Dr. Obi crossed the room in 2 steps now, all irritation gone, training taking over at last. Zainab, half conscious, watched shapes moving around her son and could not understand what they were doing. She could only hear the silence. It was the most terrifying sound she had ever known. Then suddenly, a thin cry, weak at first, barely there. Then stronger, then louder. The tiny room filled with it. Halima covered her mouth with both hands and let out something between a prayer and a sob of relief. They placed the baby on Zainab's chest. She held him the way people hold miracles they almost lost. Her lips trembled as she whispered the name she and Bello had chosen together months ago on the tiny balcony outside their room, laughing over futures they had believed would come easily. "Idris," she whispered. "Idris." His little hand curled around her finger. For a few precious minutes, the whole world disappeared. Then the door opened. Dr. Obi returned with a folder. This time there was no smile, no softness, only the clean, practiced tone of a man who knew how to turn cruelty into procedure. He began listing charges: emergency intervention fee, infant resuscitation charge, specialist handling, delivery procedures, medication costs, observation fee. The total climbed and climbed until it no longer sounded like a hospital bill. It sounded like ransom. 280,000 naira. He said the number the way one might mention the weather. Then he added that until payment was fully confirmed, the child would remain under hospital supervision according to policy. Zainab stared at him. "You're saying you'll keep my son?" He did not answer directly. Hospital policy is hospital policy. Then he closed the folder and walked out. The click of the door sounded like a lock. Within the hour, gossip began moving through the ward like smoke. The woman in room 12 wasn't truly poor, people said. She had trapped a wealthy man into paying for her. She was clever. She was manipulative. She was that kind of woman. Madame Chidinma had started it carefully, one poison drop at a time, placed in the right ears. The nurses who had looked at Zainab with sympathy began looking at her with suspicion. A woman in another room who had waved earlier now looked away when the door opened. Zainab felt the shift immediately. She knew gossip. She had grown up around it. She knew how quickly people will rewrite your suffering if they find a way to make you deserve it. So she pulled Idris closer and said nothing. Then the administrator came. He was a nervous little man with glasses and a sweaty forehead, carrying a printed paper he seemed almost ashamed to hold. He told her, without ever quite meeting her eyes, that the guarantor's card had been declined. Since no successful payment existed, the bill remained unpaid. Zainab looked at him in silence. "Alhaji Danjuma's card? Declined?" He nodded. In the hallway outside, she could already feel the next wave of gossip rising. "See?" people would say. She was nobody after all. Exactly what she looked like. But Halima heard the news too, and something in her hardened. She had worked at Blessed Hope long enough to see things that sent her crying into staff bathrooms. Things that made her fill out transfer forms twice and tear them up twice. But there was something about Zainab she could not walk away from. Maybe it was the way she held her son, like love itself had taken human form in her arms. Maybe it was because injustice always looks ugliest when it lands on someone who has no strength left to fight back. So Halima stepped into a quiet corner near the linen room, pulled out her personal phone, and called Alhaji Danjuma. He answered on the second ring. She told him everything. Room 12, the threats, the fake policy, the inflated bill, the rumors, the supposedly declined card. There was silence on the line. Then his voice came low and steady. "Do not let them take that child from her. I am coming." He hung up. Halima stood still for 1 second, straightened her hijab, and walked back to room 12. Then she placed herself at the door like a human lock. She was not moving. And sweetheart, if you're feeling this story in your chest already, take 1 second to like the video and subscribe. Stories like this remind us exactly why we stay till the end. While Halima stood guard and Zainab held her baby and prayed in silence, Alhaji Danjuma made his own calls. Not to his bank, not to a lawyer. He called a man named Musa Dangote, a private investigator who specialized in finding truths other people had buried under paperwork and fear. Danjuma gave him one name: Bello Musa. Find him, and find out who kept him from going home. Because there was something no one at Blessed Hope knew, something Danjuma himself had only just begun to suspect. 3 weeks earlier, an old photograph had been delivered anonymously to his office. 2 boys stood in front of a mango tree in Lokoja, smiling into the sun. Danjuma had recognized himself instantly at age 9, and beside him stood the boy he had searched for nearly half his life, his younger brother, Bello Musa. Years ago, a violent land dispute had shattered their family compound and scattered them in every direction. In the chaos, 16-year-old Danjuma had been holding his little brother's hand one moment and lost him the next. He had searched for years, hired people, followed rumors, visited towns, chased ghosts. Then the photograph came. Then a name. Then an address in Abuja. He had been on his way to follow that lead when a traffic diversion changed his route and brought him past Blessed Hope Private Hospital. That was where he saw a woman in a yellow dress bleeding on the hospital steps. He had stopped because any decent man should have stopped. But now the pieces were beginning to fit together with a force that made his chest tighten. Musa Dangote called back fast. He had found Bello. Not at home. In police custody. Arrested 3 weeks earlier on fraud charges that made no legal sense. Dates didn't match. Signatures were inconsistent. The complaint traced back through shell paperwork to a business interest connected, after careful digging, to one man, Dr. Amechi Obi. Danjuma sat in silence. "What does Obi want from him?" he asked. Dangote's answer came at once. "Land. Family land in Lokoja." Bello refused to sign it away. Danjuma closed his eyes. The same land that had destroyed their family once before was reaching for blood again. "Get me everything," he said. "Every document, every connection." Then he made one more call. The kind of call that cannot be taken back once made. Back in room 12, 2 nurses appeared at the door, sent by Madame Chidinma. They said they needed to take the baby for nursery observation. Halima stepped forward calmly. "Which doctor ordered that?" Neither nurse answered. "What specific clinical concern are we monitoring?" Still nothing. Because there was no medical concern, only an instruction. Only power dressed up in medical language. The nurses left. Halima stayed. Inside the room, Zainab sat upright, despite the pain ripping through her body. 4 hours after delivery, weak from blood loss, running on almost no food, she still held Idris against her chest with the posture of a woman who had reached some final line within herself and decided that whatever came through that door would have to go through her first. There was no surrender left in her, only resolve. At exactly 7:45 that evening, the corridor outside transformed. First came one government SUV, then another, then a third, then a television van from a major Abuja station, the camera operator stepping out before the engine even cut off. Last of all came the Rolls-Royce, as unhurried as ever. Staff felt the change before they understood it. Word moved through the hospital like fire through dry grass. By the time Danjuma entered the building, people were already standing in hallways for no reason except instinct. Something huge was happening, and nobody wanted to miss it. Beside Danjuma walked the State Commissioner of Health. Behind him came investigators. The hospital CEO arrived breathless from a dinner he had clearly left in a panic. Dr. Obi came out of his office with the smooth walk of a man still pretending he was in control. He began talking before anyone had asked him anything. He said the card issue was only a banking misunderstanding. He said the hospital was committed to patient care. He said all the right words with all the wrong soul behind them. Danjuma did not touch his extended hand. Instead, he stepped aside. The commissioner stepped forward. "We are here on a joint investigation," he said. "We have documentation related to fraudulent billing, denial of emergency medical care, and criminal misuse of hospital authority. If you have legal counsel, now would be the time to contact them." Dr. Obi's hand remained hanging awkwardly in the air. No one took it. Then the investigators began. Records office, admin block, billing department, patient logs, complaint register, room assignments, medication history. Every lie started coming apart. The delivery bill had been inflated. The emergency charges were fake. Room 12 had been assigned despite better rooms being available. The broken call button had been logged for repair years earlier and ignored. Then came the biggest lie of all. The card Alhaji Danjuma had given them had never been submitted to any bank, never processed, never declined. It had been manually marked as failed inside the hospital system using administrator access under the authority of Dr. Obi himself. The rejection had been invented, typed onto a screen to make Danjuma look unreliable and Zainab look abandoned. When the lead investigator announced that in the main corridor, the camera caught Dr. Obi's face at the exact moment his decades of arrogance cracked. Madam Chidinma tried to slip toward the side exit. But one investigator had already been told to watch for that. He called her name once. She stopped immediately. A board member who had arrived silently from the upper offices stepped forward and made the suspensions official. Dr. Amechi Obi, suspended immediately. Madam Chidinma Adaku, suspended immediately. A full forensic audit into hospital billing over the past 3 years would begin at once. No shouting followed, no scene, just consequences. Dr. Obi was escorted out in his white coat under the eyes of the same waiting room that had watched Zainab dragged out that very morning. 5 minutes later, Madam Chidinma followed without her lanyard, without her authority, and without the expression that had ruled that building for 11 years. No one in the waiting room clapped. No one needed to. Something quieter moved through the space. Relief. The kind that settles over a room when a long-standing weight is finally lifted. Halima went straight to room 12. She opened the door gently. Zainab sat on the bed with Idris against her chest. "It's done," Halima said softly. "Obi is gone. Chidinma is gone. No one is taking your son." Zainab looked at her for a long moment, then down at Idris, then back again. "And Alhaji Danjuma?" she asked. "He's outside," Halima said. "He said someone is coming to see you first." Zainab frowned. "Who?" Halima smiled. "Your husband." The word hit her like a physical blow. Not because she didn't believe it, because she had spent 3 weeks forcing herself not to hope too much. Her face dropped to the top of Idris's head. Her shoulders shook once, just once. Then she steadied herself the way she always did. And she waited. Bello Musa had spent 22 days in a holding cell. He had been arrested on a Friday evening after agreeing to meet a supposed business contact. By the time he realized it was a setup, his phone was gone, the accusation had already been typed, and there was a forged signature where his own should have been. He asked for a lawyer. He asked to make a call. He asked about his wife. No answer came. So he prayed. He counted ceiling blocks. He repeated to himself that Zainab was stronger than anyone he knew and would find a way to survive. When the investigator arrived to tell him he was being released because the case was fraudulent and that his wife had delivered their son at Blessed Hope Hospital, Bello had to grip the wall to stay upright. Then he walked out. Then he ran. He entered the hospital at speed, slowing only because he didn't know which direction to turn. A nurse pointed him down the corridor. He moved fast now, past the waiting room, past the nurse's station, pulled forward by something deeper than instruction. He reached room 12 and pushed the door open. Zainab was sitting up in bed. When she saw him, her face changed in a way no single word could hold. Relief, rage, grief, love, all at once. Then she lifted the baby in her arms. Bello stopped breathing for a second. He stared at his son. Small, real, sleeping with one fist tucked near his face. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. He crossed the room and sat beside her. Zainab placed Idris into his arms, and for that one holy moment, the most neglected room in the hospital became the most sacred place in Abuja. Outside in the corridor, Danjuma stood near the nurse's station with his hands clasped behind his back. He had waited 15 years. A few more minutes meant nothing now. He thought of a mango tree, red earth under bare feet, a little boy with a missing front tooth, laughing so hard he bent forward at the waist. He thought of the day that laughter had vanished into a crowd and left a silence inside him that never fully healed. Then he heard footsteps. Bello emerged slowly from room 12.
Zainab had told him there was someone waiting. Someone who had come not only for her, but for him too. He turned the corner and saw the man in the dark green agbada. Something in his body recognized the truth before his mind did. His pace slowed. He stared. Not fully at a face yet, at a feeling, a memory with no picture, a name spoken in a voice only one person ever used. Danjuma looked at him, and the stillness in him broke at last. "Bello," he said quietly. Not a question, recognition. Bello took one step, then another. Then Danjuma opened his arms, and the two brothers, separated for 15 years by violence, greed, distance, and time, held each other in the corridor of the same hospital where everything evil had almost won. Nurses walking past slowed without meaning to. An elderly patient stopped entirely. Halima pressed both hands against her chest and blinked back tears. Sometimes life does not fix what it breaks, and sometimes, against every law of probability, it does. And my love, if you've made it this far, this is your sign to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who still believes humanity can come back from the edge. Inside room 12, Zainab lay back with Idris resting on her chest, his tiny body warm and steady against hers. Through the wall, she could hear the rhythm of voices in the corridor. Not the words, just the shape of them. She knew that sound. She had grown up around family. She knew what reunion sounded like, even through concrete. She looked up at the cracked ceiling, the slow, useless fan, the stained wall, and thought about the morning. 3 buses. A receptionist who saw poverty before she saw blood. A concrete driveway. An engine sound. A stranger who stopped. Out of all the roads in Abuja, that car had taken this one. Out of all the mornings in all the world, Mercy had chosen this morning. She had arrived carrying 400 naira, a plastic bag, and a prayer. She was leaving with a son, a husband, and a family she had not known was waiting for her. The room meant to humiliate her had become the room where everything broken in her life began to return. Zainab closed her eyes. Not in defeat, not in exhaustion alone, but in that deep, quiet peace that only comes to a person who has suffered long enough to finally be seen. And in that silence,
She understood something she would carry for the rest of her life. She had never been weak. She had never been less than worthy. The people who turned her away had mistaken poverty for powerlessness, and loneliness for lack of value.
They had looked at a woman in a faded yellow dress and thought they were looking at someone disposable. They were wrong. Because some women do not arrive with money or status or protection. Some women arrive with pain in their bodies, fear and